Washington, D.C., March the 26th, 1979. In the garden of the White House, history is in the making. In the presence of US President Jimmy Carter, President Anwar Sadat of Egypt, and Prime Minister Menachem Begin of Israel sign a peace treaty. The first ever between an Arab country and the State of Israel. After 30 years of the Arab-Israeli conflict, two sworn enemies make peace. Yet despite the smiles and handshakes, the treaty was controversial.
It left a lot of things unresolved. Had it been possible to get a comprehensive Arab-Israeli peace agreement at the time, I would have felt 30 years later, I'm proud of what was achieved.
With the bilateral treaty, Egypt recovered its land occupied by Israel. But many felt it had betrayed the Arab cause.
We were trying to involve the Palestinian and the other Arab countries in the peace process because we know quite well that there will be no real peace between Egypt and Israel without a solution of the Palestinian problem.
Agreeing to peace proved a long and difficult process. A process that at times broke down over some of the region's most sensitive issues, which remain unresolved to this day. On October the 6th, 1973, coinciding with the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, Egypt launched a lightning attack across the Suez Canal into the Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptians hoped the war would break the political deadlock in their favor.
حالة حرب أكتوبر هي حالة كلاسيكية.
The October War was a classic case in world military history.
حينما الأصل الأساسي
When politics and diplomacy fail,
الدبلوماسية والسياسية.
it's normal to reinforce politics with military action
دفع العمل السياسي
in order to force the enemy to come to the negotiating table.
يجلس على ترابيزة المفاوضات.
In 1967, Israel had achieved a total victory against 3 Arab armies in the Six-Day War, occupying the Egyptian Sinai, Gaza, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Syrian Golan Heights. By going to war in October 1973, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat did not expect an overwhelming Egyptian victory. His aim was to seize a part of the Sinai and then seek to regain the rest of the territory through negotiations.
It was clear that the battle would not be able to restore the whole occupied territory. So there was a clear understanding that you would have to go to negotiations at one time or the other. The thing that was important is to go to the negotiating table while in a position of strength, not in a position of weakness.
The surprise attack gave the Egyptians an initial advantage. But after more than 2 weeks of fighting, Israeli forces repelled the attack, crossed the Suez Canal, and advanced into the Egyptian mainland. Egyptian forces on the eastern side of the canal were surrounded, and the Israelis were just 80 kilometers from Cairo. Sadat's attack had backfired. Egypt's position was now significantly weaker. But the war did bring the Arab-Israeli conflict to the top of the agenda for the Americans. US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger was dispatched to the region. Arriving in Egypt on November the 6th, 1973, Kissinger found a leader with whom he could do business.
When he first met with Sadat, they talked about world strategy, China, Russia, global balance of power. And Sadat loved being treated like, a big statesman. At that point, I think for Kissinger, this was a sign. This is somebody who can get out of the souk mentality and think strategically.
Embarking on shuttle diplomacy between Cairo and Tel Aviv, Kissinger negotiated 2 disengagement agreements between Egypt and Israel. As a result, the Israeli forces withdrew back across the Suez Canal to where they'd been before October 1973. On the ground, the war had changed little.
I don't think Henry Kissinger wanted to resolve the resolution as such. I don't think he wanted to do that. What he was interested is to ensure that there would not be resumption of fighting.
Repeat after me. I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
But in 1977, Kissinger left office following the election of US President Jimmy Carter. And in the same year, elections also took place in Israel. The right-wing Likud party won a surprising victory. This represented a dramatic shift in Israeli politics. The new Israeli Prime Minister was Likud leader Menachem Begin, with uncompromising views on what he called Judea and Samaria, the biblical terms for the West Bank.
What occupied territories? If you mean Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip, they are liberated territories. They are part, an integral part of the land of Israel.
But ironically, Sadat spotted an opportunity, thinking Israel's hardliners were the only ones who could swap land for peace.
In his mind and in everybody's mind, if Begin, the most extremist, is willing to concede, then others would not object then. Then others would also agree to go to the same way.
Sadat decided it was time for a bold move. On November the 9th, 1977, he made a shock announcement in the Egyptian parliament.
وستدهش إسرائيل إنما تسمعني الآن أقول أمامكم أنني مستعد أن أذهب إلى بيتهم إلى الكنيسة ذاك ومناقشتهم.
ما صدقتش. توقعت إنها مبالغة.
I didn't believe it. I thought it was Sadat just exaggerating.
توقعت إنها مجرد
just words or maneuvering.
الكلام خده أو
But going to Israel? Not possible.
أو غيره يعني. لكن إنه هو يروح.
Especially since visiting Israel was a taboo.
وخصوصاً إن
a meeting between an Egyptian or an Arab official and an Israeli was absolutely forbidden.
لقاء مسؤول مصري.
We regarded it as treason.
مسؤول إسرائيلي دي من المحرمات جداً.
In Tel Aviv, there was also disbelief.
I was shocked, and I remember myself calling my chief editor. And I told him what I heard, that Sadat is ready to come to Jerusalem, and he said, "You are exaggerating. No, probably you didn't understand. It's not going to happen."
Sadat was something of an actor. He loved to be on the world stage. He loved to have the American press, and he loved to play the roles. People said he used to want to be an actor on the stage, and this was the biggest stage in the world.
And a week after his announcement in Parliament, Sadat was offered the perfect stage.
I received the telex, urgent telex, from CBS, from William Cronkite, that he wants to do a live interview combining both President Sadat and Prime Minister Begin.
Would you also engage in substantive discussion?
The only condition is that I want to discuss the whole situation with the 120 members of the Knesset.
If President Sadat would come after my return from Europe, I will come back home next Friday.
Shortly after the live broadcast, Sadat received an official invitation from Israel via the American ambassador in Cairo, Herman Eiltz.
He said, "Herman, I will go to Jerusalem. I will offer the Jews peace. And after that, they will have no excuses not to return our territory, to solve the refugee problem, so forth, because what more do they want?"
But Sadat failed to read the Israeli political map correctly. His expectation of what Israel would give in return for his offer was to prove hopelessly optimistic. Others were more critical. Just 2 days before Sadat's visit to Jerusalem, Egypt's foreign minister Ismail Fahmy resigned in protest.
To liberation of the Arab city of Jerusalem.
It was very difficult. It wasn't easy at all. We had been spending all our career avoiding sitting with the Israelis or even shaking hands with them. And we were spending our time attacking their position and their aggression.
Sadat was in need of a new foreign minister to accompany him. He selected a little-known minister. His name was Boutros Ghali.
I don't hesitate because as long as it is for the service of my country, I have to be a good soldier and accept whatever are the risk of this visit.
On November the 19th, 1977, Sadat's plane left Cairo for Tel Aviv.
Atmosphere was quite relaxed. Everybody were talking as if it was done a normal trip, and the only shock we received that the distance between Cairo and Ben Gurion airport was so short. And in less than few minutes, we discovered that we are landing.
The distance between the two cities may be short, but Sadat and Begin were to find their positions were very far apart. On November the 19th, 1977, the plane carrying Egyptian President Anwar Sadat landed at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion airport. The leader of the most powerful Arab nation had come to Israel seeking peace. For many Israelis, this was nothing short of a miracle.
It was, the Messiah has come. It was so absolutely incredible. And I still believe it was incredible. I don't think in history that any parallel to it. The closest you could say the first walk of the man on the moon. But even this does not really come close to it.
I was one of the accompanying from the tarmac to the receiving line. And here stands all the Israeli leadership, government and opposition alike. And I saw what happened. Hladni mir looked at him and she said to him, Mr. President, I was waiting for many years for this moment. And Sadat whispered, me too, ma'am.
I started to cry. I forgot my job, I forgot my mission, everything. Some cameras there were taking pictures of Sadat and of this strange Israeli journalist who is crying instead of writing the report.
Back in Egypt, there were tears of a different kind.
أنا بكيت بشدة. بكيت صحيح.
I cried and cried.
حسيت إن أنا
I felt that the visit was compulsory.
حسيت إن الزيارة ديت
I didn't want it.
أنا مش عاوزها، لكن في نفس الوقت شايف.
But my head of state was going there.
وشايف إن المسألة ما ينفعش.
I felt that it would not work out.
فبصيت في عيونهم حسيت إن هم مبسوطين.
I watched television.
شمتانين
I saw in the eyes of the Israelis a look of glee at seeing Sadat.
وجمع من قيادات مصر.
And I saw in the eyes of the Egyptians
كانوا معاه
a look of defeat.
حسيت شوية بانكسار في عيون الناس اللي رايحة.
Sadat spent his first night in Jerusalem, in this presidential suite at the famous King David Hotel. Formerly the headquarters of the British Mandate in Palestine, the hotel had been bombed in July 1946. Over 90 people were killed in the attack, carried out by a militant Jewish group called the Irgun. The head of the Irgun at that time, who had ordered the bombing, was none other than Menachem Begin. 31 years later, Begin was now Israeli Prime Minister and host to the Egyptian president staying at the very same hotel. Begin's past offered an insight into his uncompromising Zionist ideology of Eretz Israel, or the land of Israel.
I knew Begin very well, and I know the ideology on which Begin was brought up. It is the map of Palestine, as defined in 1920 by the British mandate over Palestine. It included Transjordan. It does not include Sinai. It does not include the Golan Heights. For Begin, Sinai did not belong to Eretz Israel. And for him to give up Sinai, it was practically no ideological problem at all. On the other hand, to give up even 1 centimeter of Eretz Israel was absolutely impossible.
Begin believed that Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza were integral parts of Israel. This was an ideology that would prove unyielding to the conditions Sadat laid out in his speech to Israel's parliament, the Knesset.
ودعوني أقول لكم بلا أدنى تردد أنني لم أجئ إليكم تحت هذه القبة لكي أتقدم برجاء أن تجلوا قواتكم من الأرض المحتلة. إن الانسحاب الكامل من الأرض العربية المحتلة بعد 67 أمر بديهي لا نقبل فيه الجد ولا رجاء فيه لأحد أو من أحد، إذ لا معنى لأي حديث عن السلام الدائم العام ولا معنى لأي خطوة لضمان حياتنا معا في هذه المنطقة من العالم في أمن وأمان وأنتم تحتلون أرضا عربية بالقوة المسلحة.
I listened to the speech very carefully. Yes, he spoke about the rights of the Palestinians. It would have been impossible for him not to do that. But he had in his speech the main message to the Israelis, which said, we are ready to accept you among us as our neighbors in peaceful relations. This was the historic sentence.
On the streets of Tel Aviv, Israelis responded to Sadat's speech with a mix of caution and excitement.
Well, I think it is a great step for peace. Let's just wait for the results and see.
When he says to Israel that he wants back all of the things that we have won in every war, then to me it's a little bit frightening. It's too much.
He's serious in what he's talking about. And if they both give in a little bit more, then everything will be all right.
But Israel's Prime Minister, ever the tough politician, was reluctant to discuss a comprehensive accord involving the occupied territories and Palestinian rights. At a press conference held on the third day of Sadat's visit to Israel, it was clear there were still fundamental differences between the two sides.
We agree upon the principle, upon security. We agree. But the meaning of security, we differ on it.
Sadat returned to Egypt, saying he had broken what he called the psychological barrier by visiting and meeting the Israelis. But many Egyptians were left wondering who'd been the real winner.
Israel achieved unprecedented gains. The head of state of the largest Arab country in resources, people, and armed forces, an important frontline state, is visiting Israel. The visit was a great gain to Israel. They would have said to him, thank you and goodbye. That's what almost happened. But for Sadat to say he was going to embarrass Israel and to gain initiative and to break the psychological barrier, this is all just rhetoric.
Even an old lady like I am will live to see the day.
I've always said.
You always call me an old lady, Mr. President.
The following month, on Christmas Day and Sadat's birthday, Begin returned the visit. He met Sadat in his residence in the Egyptian town of Ismailia, overlooking the Suez Canal. The meeting ended in acrimony. Sadat and Begin remained poles apart, and the tension between them steadily increased. The only agreement was to form committees to continue the negotiations on a framework for peace. In January 1978, an Egyptian delegation headed by the newly appointed Foreign Minister Mohammed Ibrahim Kamel arrived in Jerusalem for the first committee talks with his Israeli counterparts. The talks were held in this hotel, but the atmosphere turned unfriendly when Kamel touched on one of the most sensitive issues of all, sovereignty over the holy city.
He enumerated all the demands of Egypt, including the liberation of Palestinian occupied territories, including Jerusalem. And I remember that day the Israelis were shocked. The next day the Jerusalem Post wrote an article called chutzpah, which I think in Israel means what a nerve. I mean, these people come to us here and ask for our capital.
Begin could hardly restrain his anger. Later that evening, at a dinner in honor of the Egyptian delegation, Begin hit back.
Peace cannot be established with a redivisioned Jerusalem, the capital city not only of the state of Israel, but traditionally and culturally of the Jewish people since the days of King David.
The differences were now out in the open. The Egyptian foreign minister stuck to his position.
The basic elements of peace, of a positive peace, of a lasting peace, of a just peace, is the element I stated very clearly this morning in my speech in the opening session of the political group.
A crisis point had been reached. Sadat called his delegation back to Cairo. Following the breakdown of talks, US President Jimmy Carter decided to intervene personally to revive the negotiations.
Almost out of despair, Carter decides on the summit. And his attitude at that time, I think, was at a minimum at the summit, we have to get an Egyptian-Israeli agreement.
Carter sent personal invites to both Begin and Sadat to come to Camp David. He intended to get them to the United States and then hammer out an agreement to bring permanent peace to the Middle East.